Well, it wasn't four-handed, it was two-headed. And perhaps four-headed because we both discussed what we were doing with our wives, who were scholars in their own right. That's as far as the writing is concerned in the general sense of the word. Specifically and physically, it was two-fingered. Berger and I met once a week, discussed, planned the book chapters and sections and paragraphs, and then started formulating, or rather setting out the content of the first and the next and the following steps in the analysis of the theory. Then we started formulating in detail, in more detail, and occasionally even articulated sentences. Then Berger went home, or I went home, and Berger started typing out what we had discussed. And I said two-fingered because Berger worked on a typewriter with two fingers, but at rapid speed. So it was four-headed and two-fingered. Well, it was a collaboration in personal and intellectual friendship. We had written about exactly three articles together as a sort of preliminary exercise to see how we could work together, and we could work together very well. Then we planned the book. At the beginning, some other people were to be involved, but for one reason or another they dropped out, so it came just to Berger and myself. After the three articles we wrote together, we set out on the book that you mentioned, on the social construction of reality, and that took some time. And then later we remained friends but did not collaborate until much later, when we wrote a little book together again and met in various places that resulted in a book by Berger, and in a book edited by Berger. In the last few years our collaboration was non-existent sociologically, but our friendship remained. Well, I didn't think much about an impact. I doubt that Berger thought about an impact. We both were glad that it was published, and we thought that it was a good piece of work. But we never thought that it would be generally appreciated, which it wasn't anyway. That it was successful in another sense of the word, that we didn't expect. First of all, I didn't follow its reception or its impact in detail. I know that at the beginning there were very few reviews, if any, so it seemed to have no impact at all on mainstream sociology at the time. However, the book started to sell in large, if not to say for a scholarly work, enormous numbers, and is still selling today. So some people who bought the book probably also read it. I'm quite sure that not everybody who bought the book read it. And on the other hand, some people who didn't buy the book might have read it. But who that was and how it influenced that work, I haven't much of an idea. I should add another thing. When we, Berger and I, were being labeled social constructivists, we were both very much annoyed. We never thought of ourselves as constructivists. And social constructivism, whatever that might mean, is, if it means anything, it may refer metaphorically to the building, to the construction of a house, of a human world by human actors. But the idea that some so-called social constructivists have is that you can make houses without bricks, that this is a sort of autopoetic exercise in thin air. Now, I consider this total nonsense. The bricks are the human body, evolutionary givens and preconditions, etc., etc., etc. And what Berger and Theis test in the book seems to have been partly forgotten in that part of the reception of the book that I'm talking about. That is the weight, and the occasionally heavy weight, of tradition, of history, of past constructions, if you wish. On the other hand, I did see that some of the ideas that the book was interpreted in a way which was not totally mistaken, and it was translated in I don't know how many languages. Probably that speaks to the fact that it might have had an impact outside of sociology and outside of the English, and the first translation was into German, outside the English and German-speaking world, academic world.
Okay.
Well, that's the easiest question to answer. Probably and no. Probably I might want to formulate some sentences differently and add a few nuances here and there, but I wouldn't change anything of the basic content. I think I still stand by it, and I'm pretty sure that Berger does the same. My intellectual trajectory is a very important sounding word. I would say it was important for me in my later thinking and work. Not in all of it directly, that is to say, I did write 3 philosophical phenomenological essays, which are not only related to the book indirectly by Schütz and by one of the chapters in the book, and it was not related closely, except again for Schütz's theory of transcendence, for my work and thinking on religion. It was very important for for all of the empirical work I've done later with colleagues and associates after the 70s on interaction and communication. I articulated a sort of theory on communicative genres, and communicative genres are, in terms of the social construction book, routines, and in a sense institutionalized routines. That work, which occupied much of my time later and resulted in a few publications, is a continuation, or rather an application, of the social construction to the details of the process of social construction. I was interested in how it really works on a level which you can record and transcribe and analyze. That was a very important influence of the early book with Berger and me on my work. Perhaps not, and that pertains only to my writing on religion and the papers and books, a book that I published on that matter. That was basically influenced by Durkheim and Weber in a peculiar combination of the two, rather than directly by anything in the social construction, or by phenomenology, or by Schwitz. The book was published in a German translation, the book on Invisible Religion, was published in a German translation much later with an added chapter where I reconsidered some of my thoughts. And that chapter was, again, not influenced directly by social construction, but by Schwitz's theory of transcendence. In a manner of speaking, you could say that there is a certain discontinuity, is the wrong word, but there is a lack of direct theoretical connection, with the exceptions I mentioned. No, I wouldn't say that there was any difference in that. There was a difference in the fact that I had more training and more direct interest in phenomenology and as philosophy than Berger. And Berger knew more than I did about the history of the sociology of knowledge. So one chapter dealing with the history is much more Berger's than mine, and the one in which I extracted some ideas from the structures of the life world, and Schwitz, of course, that is more immediately mine. But we discussed both chapters, were discussed by both of us, and are not individual contributions, but they may be attributed somewhat more closely to Berger and the other one more closely to me. As for the elementary theoretical part, or the core of the social construction, there was no division of labor. We worked on it together, we thought about it together, we talked about it together, and we occasionally argued about it, but in a very compatible manner. We had no serious disagreements on that matter. Disagreements came in about our positions on our theories of religion. We were not social constructionists, and we didn't think that this was an adequate basis for understanding the human social world. That was the beginning, but it was not written polemically against Parsons, for example, although implicitly it was different, certainly different. Beyond that, there weren't all that many targets we had in the book. As far as I recall, it was not directed specifically at anybody, at any particular theory, possibly with slightly ironic treatment of psychoanalysis and parts of psychology. No, I couldn't. One thing followed another. I don't recall the discussions with Peter Berger on that matter, but it seemed to be a fairly sensible, if not to say logical, way to proceed. The objective part, of course, owes much to Durkheim, and the subjective part owes much to Weber and Schwitz. But on the assumption that human reality is humanly built up and maintained and destroyed, it was a logical way to start with the one thing and continue then to what the sediments of actions and communications are in institutions and how they in turn influence later, or let me say, later constructions. Schütz called his first big piece of work the sinnhafte Aufbau der sozialen Welt. So Berger and I might have later preferred, we talked about it, we discovered by misinterpretations of the intent and of the content of the book that construction lent itself to such misinterpretations, and I would now prefer to have called it the building, or something of that sort. It's too late, but social constructivism, as I said, is not what I would consider a sensible progeny of the book itself. Now, there may be other sources, there are other sources, of course, in the natural sciences. Luckmann is a constructionist, if you wish, in Germany. But our book is not a theory of, it's a constructivism is simply a mislabeling, especially if you link it to the other notions of constructivism, like Forster and others. No, it's much more realistic. I consider social constructivism essentially metaphysical in the pejorative sense of the word. But self-labeling seems to be very important to some people, not only in sociology, but very much so in sociology. They love to label it themselves this or that and discover fancy words for it. Neither Berger nor I had ever had any sympathy with that, and we didn't oppose it. We ignored it. Another mislabeling, not of Berger's but of my work, was social phenomenology, a complete contradictio in adjecto. There is no social phenomenology, there is sociology and there is phenomenology. And the Husserl-Schützian Gurwitsch kind of phenomenology serves in my mind and the structures of the life world as a philosophy of social science, but not as social science itself. So mislabeling, Berger and I are not the only victims of mislabeling in the history of scholarship. Well, if there is a 100th anniversary, I won't be around to hear it.